welcome to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners policy sessions on this January 5th, 2022. Gary, what's up first?
Thank you, Chair Smith. First, Commissioner Shull is out of the office today. Commissioner Fisher will be here shortly. First session today is Federal Legislative Agenda Update. We have our team from Public and Government Affairs, as well as the county's federal contract lobbyist from Summit Strategies. I'll introduce Sue Hildick, the Director of Public and Government Affairs, to introduce the team, please. Go ahead.
Good morning, Commissioners. Nice to see you. Delighted that it's this time of year again to hear a recap from our colleagues in Washington with Summit Strategies about the great work they've been doing to help advance Clackamas's priorities in the congressional process. And just to note that we've had a long working relationship, 10 years together, over 10 years, I think, with some key successes like Sunrise Corridor, and most recently Willamette Falls Locks. We're still hopeful that that will ultimately land, and so we're delighted that they could make the harrowing trip out to share an update with you live. And so you all know Hal. I'm not sure you've met yet Jake Okenberg, who is a new colleague at Summit, and we're delighted that he's going to be working on some of our priority issues. So Hal, we'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Sue, and Chair Smith, and Commissioner Savas, and Commissioner Schrader, and maybe Commissioner Fisher is online. It's nice to see you all. It's nice to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you. You see Jake and me before you today, but Michelle Giguère and Mark Dedrick and Ben Stevens, our other partners on the team, are online, and so you don't see them online, but they're listening and are available to answer questions as well. Mark and Ben had intended to be here in person, but their flights were canceled yesterday, and so they weren't able to make it, but they're online and will participate as they can. Jake and I are going to go over very briefly the executive summary of the report that we put together for you, some strategies put together for you at the end of last month. And the executive summary is the first couple of pages, which really focus on kind of 4 different theme areas that we've been focused on for the county over the last year. And then that's followed up with literally 9 pages of appendix. And the 9 pages of appendix go through each of your federal priorities and talk about what the priority is, what the status is of each of those priorities, and gives 4 or 5 or 6 bullets of activities that we've engaged in on the county's behalf with the PGA staff over the last year to advance that particular priority. And so while it seems a little daunting if you pick up the packet and it's 11 pages, it's actually the matrix format is bulleted. You can go through it pretty quickly and see if you a particular priority that might be of particular interest to you. You can very quickly drill down on where it is and the status of that particular priority. But in the executive summary, we divided it up into 4 different areas because it was fairly easy to think of the activities that we've done on behalf of the county in those 4 areas. First is the CARES Act and Arpa funding, and that really focused pretty much a lot of our activity on the county's behalf in the first 6 months out of the year. And that's because in the first 6 months of this past year, Congress was, and the administration was really trying to figure out how to get the CARES Act money out the door, because the CARES Act was funded in 2021, and that was the first really major COVID relief package. And that had some problems because it included, for instance, a 500,000 person threshold, population threshold, for direct allocation of a lot of CARES Act money. So some of your neighboring communities got direct allocations and Clackamas County didn't. And that seemed really unfair to us and really unfair to you, I'm sure. And so we wanted to make sure when Congress started looking at the next COVID relief package, which is called the amending the American Rescue Plan Act, that it did not have that kind of population threshold and that you were able to get direct funding. And the congressional delegation, Senator Merkley, Senator Wyden, and representatives were just right on top of that and really insisted that that it not have any kind of population threshold and that funds coming from the federal government were able to come directly to Clackamas County. And the success in that effort resulted in an $82 million allocation directly to Clackamas County in the Arpa funds. And I think later today you're going to be looking at the ways that you're going to spend some of those ARPA dollars. And that is a real success story because I think we felt particularly good about the fact that the funds were coming from the feds and not having to go to the state and then have the county having to go begging at the state level, but they're coming directly to you. So that was a big focus in the first 6 months of the year. But we also then started focusing on congressionally directed spending, or previously we called it earmarks, because Congress for the first time in 10 years restored the congressionally directed earmark process in this last budget cycle. And so working with Trent and Chris and Sue, we focused on what are the requests that the county was going to make, and then making sure that the congressional delegation understood those requests. And 3 specific requests were submitted for appropriations. Out of those 3 requests, the one that has been successful was the $6.2 million that was allocated to the Willamette Falls locks. The Congress has not, unfortunately, finished the FY22 appropriations cycle. We're operating on a current continuing resolution, which goes until early March. And if Congress, between now and when the continuing resolution finishes, is able to move the appropriation bills forward, particularly the energy and water appropriation bill, because the $6.2 million is pending in both the House appropriation bill as well as the Senate energy and water appropriation bill, that $6.2 million will happen. There's no question about it. Now, if Congress ultimately fails to pass the appropriation bills and has to move forward on a continuing resolution for the rest of the fiscal year, unfortunately, all the earmarks die. And that means the $6.2 million would go away. So we're watching that process very closely, keeping an eye on where it is and how that moves forward. Yesterday I was having a conversation with your chairman, and she asked me what my prediction was, which is a good question. And I said it could really go either way, but there are a lot of Republican members in the Senate and a lot of Democratic members in the Senate who have some pretty significant earmarks in those bills. And my guess is that they are going to be pretty interested in making sure that they don't go away, because they want their projects as much as we want this one. And so that will be helpful in their final negotiations, hopefully in the next couple of months. So that was another focus of activity in the last year. So the appropriation process, the CARES Act implementation, and ARPA. And then the third big area that we focused on was infrastructure funding. And of course, infrastructure has been a huge topic of the conversation for a number of years now in Congress, and Congress finally passed a really significant infrastructure bill that was signed into law on November 15. And that's called the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is a real mouthful. And now the Biden administration is trying to change the name of that to the bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. I don't know if that's going to stick, but I know that I have a hard time saying IIJA very fast. And the IIJA was $1.2 trillion, which included $550 billion in new spending. And so it's a little confusing because you see press reports about a $1.2 trillion bill, and you also see press reports about $550 billion. And it's just they're counting the dollars in different ways. The 1.2 trillion included authorization money that was just kind of rolling forward in annual authorizations. 550 billion is the new money. Out of the $550 billion, that goes for a wide variety of infrastructure, not just highways and bridges, but also for broadband, also for water, wastewater. It includes other types of infrastructure that airports, different types of infrastructure, transit, that you would be interested in. But out of the 550, about 110 billion of that goes for direct highways and bridges. And most of that is discretionary spending. So it is new grant funding that will become available through the U.S. Department of Transportation, and lots of new grant opportunities for the county to apply for. Some of this funding actually is distributed, some of the new funding is distributed by formula, and you have all been involved with conversations, I'm sure, with ODOT and the Oregon Transportation Commission about the $1.2 billion in additional funding that ODOT is receiving by formula. And I know that Commissioner Savas has been tracking that really closely because we're hoping that a portion of that money, the 1.2 trillion or billion that's coming into the state, is in fact made available for the Abernathy Bridge I-205 project, which takes a lot of pressure off of the tolling conversation. And Commissioner Savas, I need to congratulate you on your challenge to the region to push back the RTP amendment until after the Oregon Transportation Commission makes some funding decisions, because that's absolutely the right move, and certainly the direction that we hope that they go in. And thank you for your advocacy on that. So on the infrastructure funding, as I said, 80% of the money is going to be distributed by discretionary grants. Some of those new funding categories include bridge funding. Some of the new categories include rural spending. Some of it is focused on a new program called Protect, which is related to resiliency. And so if we're looking at a project like the Bull Run Bridge project, which of course if that bridge went down, Portland's water system would be really compromised because they wouldn't be able to serve those pumping stations. That's a resiliency issue. So that there's a whole new category of spending for resiliency projects, and that would be one that we would advocate that the county go after some of that funding for that particular project. And I was talking with the chairman yesterday about new strategies to try to make that a more regional request as opposed to just a county request. And we're going to pursue that as well. So that's the third area. First one, CARES Act, ARPA. Second one, congressionally directed spending or earmarks. Third was infrastructure. And the fourth is really tracking the Build Back Better funding. And I'm going to turn to Jake to talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Hal. Chair Smith, Commissioners, good to be with you this morning. This will be a very brief final fourth piece. As many of you saw over the holiday break, Senator Manchin said he is not going to support the Build Back Better bill and put the kibosh on that, both communicating that message publicly as well as to the President and Senate Democratic Leader Schumer. The question of will they get to yes, is there a smaller bill that Senator Manchin might support? Still an open question. We're monitoring that very closely. Things that we do know, the Senator Manchin has said that he is not in favor of items that only last a year or two and then expire. He would rather see a smaller amount of items in a bill that last for longer. So that would mean by definition that many items that were in the original framework that the White House put out and that the House passed would not be in a final bill. And just yesterday or the day before, as you may know, there's significant housing investments in the House passed bill. Senator Manchin just yesterday or the day before indicated that he's really interested in the climate change pieces. And that actually bodes well on one aspect for the county, in that a piece of that is spending a lot more money on wildfire prevention, which is a huge issue for the state, for the county. And so I'm hopeful that that indication from the senator gives a path forward. Another complication is that Senator Manchin has gone on the record saying he actually wants to revisit the 2017 Republican tax cut package passed under President Trump, and that he thinks that some of those tax cuts should be revisited. That would be a much longer effort through the committee process, whereas Senator Sinema has been on the record saying that she doesn't want to touch those. So there's a lot of pinch points here where we don't know where it's going to land. But really, at this point, Senator Manchin is in control of the conversation, and the Senate has moved on to voting rights for the next couple weeks, and then may get back to a Build Back Better bill. But we're watching along with all of you what Senator Manchin shares with us next. But the fact that he did state that he was interested in the climate change pieces was interesting, because he's at least putting out there things that he might say yes to. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jake. And I neglected, before I started, to give a little background on Jake. So we're thrilled that Jake has joined the team at Summit Strategies. He comes to us with from 10 years of working with Senator Merkley as his business liaison before joining Summit Strategies. And before he worked for Senator Merkley, he worked for Senator Wyden in a similar capacity. And so is someone who brings a lot of knowledge of the business community and the business situation in Oregon to the Summit team, and I think is going to really help strengthen our team, and is already really helping strengthen our team, and we're delighted that he's part of the Clackamas County team now as well. Happy to answer questions. If you have specific questions about any of the process that we've just discussed, or any of the priorities that are between, page 4 through 11 in your briefing material.
I'm going to open it up for commissioners' comments and questions now. So who would like to be up first?
I'll jump in.
Go ahead,
If
Sonia.
nobody else can jump in. Just a question for Jake on the Build Back Better, since it's now dead for at least 2 weeks. Is there any talk about the childcare provisions? Are those more popular than some of the other ones? What's the feeling in the sense about that?
We don't have a good sense right now. We know two things that Senator Manchin has said he doesn't like. He doesn't like the parental leave provisions, and he doesn't like the increased child tax credit provisions that were in for 1 year last year and expired on New Year. So that's what we know he doesn't like. What he's going to get to yes on,
It's
big question mark.
amazing, isn't it? Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Schrader.
Yeah, I'm glad that Commissioner Fisher mentioned the child care piece, because that's become, just from your background in business, one of the ways we've been approaching it is going directly to the business community and saying, unless we have adequate child care, that's part of the problem with people actually returning to work, not just the fact that we've had a major pandemic, wildfires and ice storms, knock on wood. Anyway, so what's the process of convincing, some of the business savvy people that this is a really good investment, not just because it will help families and, and folks do that, but actually it will help their business and get them back to work. Has that assertion been made? Has that been part of the conversation? Has that been something that is appealing to some of the more conservative folks who might want to say it's good for business, it's good for, well, not conservative, but just pro-business? So what do you think, Jake? Is that something that's been worked, because you're the business guy?
That argument, thank you, Commissioner, that argument has definitely been made. The White House has had business folks with them at many of their presentations when they've been putting forward these items, and they definitely want to showcase businesses that believe this would help the economy, getting people to be able to be more steady in the workforce. At the more micro level to individual senators, I'm not aware of that. I do know that Senator Manchin himself has been getting a tremendous amount of pressure in state from businesses, from labor, to move forward on something with Build Back Better, and they've been disappointed that he said outright no. And so there's a lot of internal pressure from within his state to get to yes on something.
So no specifically to the child care piece, or just the whole package until it's redone, pretty much?
Sorry, your question again?
So
Commissioner?
no to just the child care piece, but it's the whole package because he wants to revamp it to make it a smaller, more sustainable package. That's his message right now.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, and I think my impression in interpreting what he's said in the press is that, as Jake said, he's very anxious about the idea that we're going to have a very broad package that only guarantees funding for 1 or 2 years, because he recognizes that the political pressure would be intense to maintain many of those initiatives. And he is, genuinely concerned about where the dollars come from to maintain those programs. So he would rather see a more focused bill that might be a similar cost, but can roll out for the next 10 years and not set up those political fights 2 years down the road. So we can understand where he's coming from, but I know it's very frustrating to a lot of people.
That is the key question.
I have a couple questions. Regarding this SRS reauthorization, the annual 5% was ended, and so they're going to try to allocate $60 million per year. And counties can decide whether to accept the SRS payments or federal timber harvest receipts. Have we done any number crunching on that to know what that means for Clackamas County?
I do not off the top of my head know what that means. I would venture to guess that because the annual 5% reduction is ending, that the county might take the FY 2017 levels and go with that as opposed to your projected cuts. But you'd have to ask your forester to run those
Okay,
numbers.
let's follow up with that. So is that pending, from what I understand, Sue? We don't know, is that part of the overall package before Congress, packages before Congress, do we know?
I don't know. Do
Yeah,
you?
we'll just find out.
We'll
It's just a
find out.
question, you guys get back to me.
Right,
You
okay.
know, Trent and
We'll
Chris
get
and
the
then get back to
estimates.
me on that. Because I had heard the 5% authorization had ended, and Martha, I don't believe, and I talked to you about NACO. NACO did not advocate for that either at the national level, and I was very concerned about that at the time. Let's talk about the Wild Falls locks for a moment. The $6.2 million ask is pretty large for a earmark. And so the chances of getting the locks funded through the earmarks may be more difficult, and there's another route that we're pursuing in case that doesn't happen?
Well, the 6.2 million is the fourth largest earmark in the state, so it is a large earmark and unusually large, actually. Most earmarks that are coming to Oregon are more in the 1,500,000 level, and so the 6.2, the delegation really worked aggressively to make sure that that happens. Now, if it does happen, that's guaranteed funding, and if the energy and water appropriation bills passes, that would be added to the 3.2 million that's already in the work plan for the Corps, and that would also be added to the 7.25 million that the state put in. So that's enough funding, assuming inflation doesn't eat us all, that's enough funding to make the locks operational, but not modernize and provide additional amenities such as public access and restrooms and.
Well, I believe it's the charge of the new state commission that was set up, which I've been appointed to, is one of our charges is for fundraising, to make it operational, develop a business plan, hire an executive director, and work on it that way, which does not mean efforts to give you more funding from any of our government agencies would stop. I would assume those would continue. But my main question here is, if the earmark of 6.2 million is rejected, are we flexible enough to go through another route and try to secure money elsewhere?
It's a good question. I think we know that Chairman DeFazio, Chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, wrote a letter to the Army Corps in December, and he said, he encouraged the Corps and he reminded the Corps that he had advocated for and included millions, billions of dollars for the Corps in the IIJA. And he said, you have new resources, and I would like to see $7.5 million of those resources go to the Willamette Falls Locks. So
Nice.
That's another avenue that is underway, would be additional money on top of the 6.2, even if it happens or not.
Wow.
So that would give the commission or authority, excuse me, new operating capacity then to shift some of the funding around and decide that you could afford some of those amenities that aren't there right now if they pay attention to the chairman. So
Got it.
that was an exciting development in December. You know, it's still a core decision, but he's pressing them to make that decision.
Okay. Paul, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure what weighs on all of our decision makers in Washington, D.C. is probably the debt, the national debt to some degree. I'm sure that influences reluctance maybe to approve something. I know that if, you know, so sorry for asking the question, but where I'm trying to go is that, you know, I'm trying to predict as best I can what the funding that might happen, what bills might pass, what funding might be available from the federal level, and then the gap, what might have to be filled locally if we want to make something happen locally, whether at the state level or whether in the regional level, as far as transportation, for example. So my question is this: who is the recognized, in Washington, D.C., who is the recognized authority on the financial, the national integrity, financial integrity of our national debt, our ability to serve the debt, how we are competitive in the world financially? Because I know that, you know, continuing to borrow and bring down the debt has got to be something that's weighing on everyone's minds. And it seems to me that's going to be a factor, whether it's Manchin or some of our Oregon delegates as well, delegation. It's got to be a factor. So I'm just, with inflation rising the way it is, and all these concerns and all this new money that's flowing in, which a lot of people believe it's aggravated the inflationary aspects to some degree. But I'm kind of worried, frankly, that it's been also a stimulus for some people maybe to leave the job market, and we've got all this money, so to speak, coming in the market, and maybe not enough of a workforce to actually put that to work, and let alone the supply chain for whatever those federal dollars are directed towards, whether it's building materials, construction materials, and so forth. But it seems like a distant question, but I just want to get your sense. Who do we think is really the financial authority, if you will, on our debt, our ability to serve the debt?
Well, I'm not sure there's a really clear answer other than the budget committees are, you know, that's part of their task is to monitor and try to manage the federal budget along those lines. Sometimes they're more successful in it than others. The issues that you just outlined in your comment and questions, I think are very real. You know, the debt continues to rise. We've just increased it again. And now it's increased through, I guess, just past the next national election, and before it has to be dealt with by Congress again. And those are real concerns. And how that impacts you at the local level is a little bit more removed, but it certainly has inflationary impacts, and that's where it hits you, I think, because your costs for some of these projects are going higher and higher, and they're going to continue to increase. my guess. You know, when the economy was very stalled in 2008, it was a great time to build projects because you get really good bids, although nobody had any money. Now everyone has money, but it's a tough time to go out to bid because you get really expensive projects, and you know, you see a project that was projected to cost 10 million and now all of a sudden it's 13 million, or a project that was 400 million is now 500 million. Like look at the Burnside Bridge or something like that. You know, the costs just keep going up. So it's something to try to pay attention to. I think it's at such a macro level, it's very hard to manage, other than paying attention to it and trying to project how that might impact you 6 months down the road.
Right, so when you say the budget office, we're talking about the CBO.
Well, CBO and also budget committees in Congress.
Okay. Yeah, but you know, the reason I bring that up is I know we're always here, you know, we're always asking for money. We want to see federal funding, but we don't ever think about really how that money, where it comes from. And when you see people leaving the workforce, that's the payroll tax that makes everything happen. So our resources are diminishing. And yet, you know, I don't know how that really pencils out, and I don't know how that factors into the minds again of our federal delegation.
I think, Commissioner, the folks leaving the workforce right now, that issue is a really complicated issue, and how it shakes out, you know, the great American resignation that we're hearing about. It doesn't appear that the majority of those people are resigning to just sit at home on their couch. It appears as if they're resigning to try something else, to move into some other job initiative. So we may be surprised at how the great American resignation actually impacts the economy 6 or 12 months down the road from right now. But it does have some impact on payroll tax for sure right now. Absolutely. One of the things that I didn't mention, as excited as I get and as we all get with these new funding opportunities, particularly the new discretionary funding opportunities in infrastructure, is that when Clackamas County applies for any of those funds are almost always 80-20 federal local funds. So you can't just say, you know, this is a new discretionary pot of money and we're going to be able to get a $10 million grant out of that. You're going to have to come up with your 20% match before you get the grant if you're going to be competitive. So that is a bit of a challenge, and it's one, in talking with Sue and I have talked a number of times about the relationship between the county and some of these national associations like NACO or League of Cities or groups like that. And it's an issue that I've tried to raise, that it's very exciting to see all these new discretionary grant opportunities, but if your local community or your local county or your local city doesn't have the matching funds, they can't do much with it. And so that is an ongoing concern, and one that we try to bring to the national associations to help advocate for resolution on that, or to at least increase the federal share so that the local share is not so significant, because that's a big hurdle for you to get over.
Yeah. Last question, somewhat related, but 5 years or so ago when we were in DC with our staff for one of our visits, we sat and listened to a national economist. Do you remember his name? He was the person who made the statement that stuck with me, is that, you know, this is when President Trump was first elected, and there was big talk about the infrastructure bill that he may or may not move forward. And the warning I remember the economist saying is that just because a whole bunch of money comes in doesn't necessarily mean you've got the supply chain, you've got the workforce, everything else. So beware that money is not, in and of itself, is not the answer in order to make these projects happen. So I'm just kind of curious what I forgot what his name was. Do you recall?
I do not recall off the top of my head what his name was, but I'm sure I could find it looking back on those old agendas. But you know, it is an issue, and we've seen this with the supply chain, as you say, but it's also an issue with the engineers and kind of the age of the infrastructure workforce, because a lot of the workforce that was engaged in serious infrastructure investment in the 60s and 70s, they're retiring now, and people hadn't kind of gone in to replace them. And so there is a real shortage of individuals who are prepared to help direct how this spending is going to happen.
Yep. Thank you.
And the demographics that you provide in the slideshow, you mentioned that the unemployment rate in Clackamas County is now 10.7%.
Wow.
And maybe the staff provided that. Frankly, that was a surprise to me. So we talk about a workforce shortage. We have jobs. Everywhere I go, I see a sign. I see a help wanted, apply within sign. Clackamas County has a lot of jobs open. I don't know what's going on in the workforce. I just wish people would go to work. And because it's good for your psyche, it's good for all kinds of things. It puts money into your household, it puts money into the economy. And but that statistic surprised me.
Where was that?
It's in the slideshow presentation here, Sonia.
For the next session.
Oh, it's for the next session?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Well,
really
it
high.
happens to be on the federal update too, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a high unemployment rate, if that is correct.
Yeah.
I
That's
assume,
significantly higher than the national average. So.
it is, I assume it's seasonally adjusted because we do have a significant amount of agriculture here. The people aren't working right now in farms.
Right, yeah, I don't know, but that's significantly higher than the national average is, and it would be interesting to drill down on that number.
It would be very interesting for me. Gary, you have
If
your
I may,
card up?
that's on the next session, it's this last year's federal agenda book. So that was true a year ago. That's not currently the case.
Oh,
Our
good.
unemployment rate is not that high. Unemployment
Really?
rate.
I was
Yes,
just
I've seen the
having a
Lynn
brain
Wallace
twist.
report she sends, and I've not seen that number in her report.
Well,
so-
it says, no, Gary, it says Clackamas County Board of Commissioners, and
Right, that's from last year. Should be from last year, isn't it?
it doesn't say. It says Chair
What
Tootie
I-
Smith. It's on this presentation, on this slide deck.
It is from the 2021 congressional briefing.
2021 congressional briefing.
Okay, so last
Gee,
year.
I seem to
Yeah,
have created a
so, yeah.
controversy
Yeah.
by quoting the slide that was presented to us.
It is in your packet. That should have been last year. so-
It just kind of blows apart our brains when we get other information. It's like, what? Of course it would be
We'll have
alarming.
You
clarity
know what?
on
We're
that
going to
for
have
you.
staff check on that.
Yeah, we'll confirm that.
We'll confirm whether that's true or not, and I'll make a correction if I need to make a correction, okay?
I think it's closer to 4%. maybe,
Yeah,
or-
that's what I keep hearing.
But I don't know. I mean, I checked the employment, state employment.
I
Stats.
believe, Chair, that the 10.7% is a June 2020 statistic. I don't know if that's properly labeled
A
or
what?
not. June 2020 number is the 10.7. And that Clackamas County is now around what the state average is.
Which is?
Possibly a little bit less. I think it was 4.3.
Well, that is more comforting to me.
Yeah.
So maybe we can do an update on this particular statistic.
Not seasonally adjusted. One data point for November 2021 actually shows it as 3.1% in Clackamas County.
Not
So far
seasonally
below the state.
adjusted, okay.
Yeah.
Good, all right.
But I'm pretty
And that-
confident that 10.7 is a 2020 number.
Okay, good. Thank you
Which would make
for that
sense.
point of clarification. Now, it says also, under Oregon's fastest-growing cities, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them in Clackamas County. I wonder if that number is still correct. Happy Valley being number 1, Wilsonville 2, Sandy 4, Molalla streaking up at 8. I don't know that that's true. So if we could also check
We'll be updating that
on
for the new
if we
agenda.
do
Yep.
indeed have 5 of Oregon's fastest-growing cities in Clackamas County, what the updated number that is. Because I know people are moving into Clackamas County. I
Yeah.
know businesses are moving into here, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Which is
Any
exciting.
other comments? Oh, Martha, your card is up.
I have a question about the resolution, because I sit on the Business and Community Services at NACO.
Which resolution?
What resolution?
Well, the resolutions that we move forward at NACO.
Oh.
Could you flesh out a little bit for me? I think you mentioned that we could have a resolution that have the federal share be larger, in other words, lower than the amount of the match.
To the local match.
Is that something that's been pushed forward before? Because we are at a deadline now where I can pull together a resolution, at least to get that kind of a conversation started. under that NACO committee. So how
Well,
would we do that? What kind of
you know,
language would that entail? I mean,
It's an
you know.
interesting idea, Commissioner, and I'd be happy to work with you and the staff on drafting such a resolution if you wanted to bring it forward. It would have to be probably, future-oriented as opposed to, wouldn't go back and amend like the IIJA and change the matching.
No, but it would be a
but-
future, but it
but-
could be something we could be working on at a larger national
And
level.
it's an issue that I hear about across the country, especially because I was on recently a webinar. I was a speaker at a webinar, individuals from all over the country, and this issue came up regularly, saying, we're really excited about this new spending, but we don't have the match. How do we solve that problem? And so it is not just a problem that an isolated number of counties are facing. Communities all across the country are facing the same problem. So that would be an issue that I would think NACO would be interested in discussing.
Yeah, and I may be in a position to move that forward with the new incoming president, particularly. So if that's something maybe we could, if I could ask my colleagues, if that's something that we could put on an agenda and maybe at least have some backup help with you, I could make some phone calls.
Yeah, let's discuss it at issues, Martha.
Yeah, I think it's a good
Exactly what you
idea.
wanna do.
I think it's a good idea.
We'll put it on at issues, and it's not time sensitive.
I think it would pass overwhelmingly, basically, and then it would move forward as part of the national NACO agenda. And obviously, we wouldn't expect anything to happen immediately, but generally, once these resolutions are made and they're good resolutions, they'll continue from year to year. So at one point, something tips the balance.
I see what you're trying to do
Yeah.
here. Let's bring it up at an issues and.
Okay, great.
Have
Right.
Tracy make sure she earmarks it for us.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Gary?
This is just an informational update. Thank you very much, Hal and Jake.
Yeah.
We appreciate your advocacy
Nice to
very
meet
much.
you.
Please keep us informed, and hopefully your trip back to DC will be smoother than it was coming out.
Well, thank you. And, Summit Strategies and all of the colleagues that I work with there, we're all just delighted to help represent your interests and are honored to do so. So thank you for your support and confidence in us, and we'll continue to work as hard as we can for you.
Great, great.
If you can't make it out, let me know. I'll make you a ravioli dinner. I made it back from Boston, having a new grandchild, but my luggage followed me 2 days later, so, so.
You don't need your clothes.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Nice to see you guys.
All right, let's move into the next session then, which is also Public and Government Affairs. This is approval of the county's 2022 state and federal legislative agendas. We have Sue Hildick, Chris Lyons, and Trent Wilson to present. So I quickly want to go back to the unemployment number. I actually looked online. I apologize. I see where the confusion is. First, it was in the last session, although it was meant to be this session. It is the draft 2021 federal legislative agenda. It does use statistics that are from June 2020. It's on the first page. I do recommend you revise those to 2021 stats, please, because that was the rate. It was a 10% unemployment rate in June 2020. Boy, I know the data doesn't come that quickly, but I hope we have more updated data.
Right,
Yeah.
so what you have in your packet is our agenda from this past year. That includes the most recent unemployment numbers we were able to get from the state. And so, looking ahead, we'll be producing a 2022 agenda that will update those numbers.
Well, you just need to be happy that I'm reading the material.
We
It was a test. You passed the test, Chair. Well done. Well done. Okay, go ahead, please, Sue, Chris, and Trent.
Okay, and we have a PowerPoint on this one, Shannon, if
good,
you can
okay.
open that. Chris Lyons, Government Affairs, alongside Trent Wilson. And we're going to segue from looking at the 2021 federal priorities and move over to 2022, specifically here to seek your final adoption on the county's 2022 state and federal agendas and the priorities contained within those. And we'll also be discussing potential 2022 federal earmark requests, but we're not asking for your approval on those today. We will be bringing those forward in a more final state in a handful of weeks.
So today, are you asking for our approval on the state agenda?
Just the federal and state agenda, not including the earmarks.
Got it? Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So first, just a quick overview of some key dates and process and the dynamics. In DC with the U.S. Congress, the session began at the beginning of last year. It goes for a 2-year period, so that will be ending in January of 2023. And right now, both the House and Senate are in Democratic control, very slightly, and there is a Democratic president. At the state level, this coming legislative session begins on February 1st. It's a short session, so there's only 35 days at a maximum, adjourning by March 7th. There are Democratic supermajorities in both the House and Senate. There's an open question on whether this session will be virtual or not. I think as a result of Omicron, my guess is it will be probably more on the side of virtual, though I believe last I'd heard they were setting up some hearing rooms in a building outside of the Capitol to allow for some in-person work. Right now, the hearing rooms in the building are under construction for some seismic improvements. As we see most short sessions, the number of bills are typically about 300 versus a long session where they're about 3,000. So it's certainly a more reasonable amount that we can churn through, but at the same time, the deadlines are so quick that we need to be very nimble in all of our work. And I've reiterated this in the past, but at the state level, the committee process is super important. Most of the work is done in the committees and then moved on to the floor for final passage. So that is where we spend, and the legislature spends most of its time. And finally, we as of the past few years, have the benefit of the Clackamas caucus. This is a group of 15 members, most of the members of the Clackamas state legislative delegation, who banded together and formed this group and are working in a bicameral, bipartisan manner to advance some of the county-wide priorities. And that has been super beneficial to us on a number of our issues, including the Courthouse, 205, and others, as we saw this last session where we achieved success on a number of those thanks to all of their efforts. So they are continuing their efforts and working very well together. Next slide. So just a quick background on our process. You'll recall that PGA leads the effort to develop our legislative agendas. This process begins in the fall and includes consultation with all of you, plus our departments, to suss out what the upcoming priorities should be. And those priorities are then finalized with your adoption of them, hopefully today, in advance of the sessions. Next slide. And how this is laid out on our agendas, we have our initiatives and our priorities, and these are specific concrete issues that we as a county are advocating for. Typically, they are very unique to Clackamas County, like the I-205 project or the Courthouse, or they have a major impact on us and may be timely. And then the legislative principles, these are a newer addition, and these are more general in nature, and they outline what we as a county stand for, and you can think of them more as values, and they are framed around the board's 5 strategic goals. And these really help us during session to provide us a roadmap for issues that come up that we didn't necessarily anticipate, and give us that ability to be nimble in taking positions throughout the session. So next slide, that brings us to our draft 2022 state agenda. And as you'll see, it's pretty short this year, in part because it is a short session, but also we had knocked off so many of our priorities from last year that there are just a few that are moving ahead to this year, plus I would say one new addition. So under the county initiatives, we are, first and foremost, we have the courthouse replacement project. You'll recall that this last session, the legislature authorized the $94.5 million that we were requesting, which was the state's 50% match for this project. And they did that without providing final approval because they still wanted some more information around how this whole public-private partnership, P3, would work. And so in a budget note, they asked that we work with OJD to submit a report that helped to answer some questions around that, and that their approval of the funding would be contingent on receiving that budget note. And so now here we are going into session with the budget note report in hand. We are going to be co-presenting that with OJD next week during legislative days. We're in good shape, and we'll be talking with our Clackamas caucus and others to make sure they feel comfortable with where we're at. And hopefully here within 2 months, we'll hopefully have that approval on the funding. The second initiative, as we've seen in the past, is the I-205 Improvements Project. We successfully passed HB 3055 this last session, which gives ODOT the tools to be able to advance that project. And they are now on a course to go to construction in the summer, having released the bid last month. But there is still a lot happening, especially at the regional level, at Metro, and at the OTC, where there's a number of key decisions that need to be made around both this project, the financing of it, and all of the tolling work that has a very close nexus with all of that, with that project. So all that being said, there is quite a bit of legislative involvement that we will continue to engage on with our legislators, and want to make sure that they are continuing to advocate for that project. And then really quickly, under the county priorities, continuing to focus on the housing crisis and making sure that the legislature is continuing to put an emphasis on that one. And the newer item is, and I'll read this, supporting legislation that provides state indemnification of local governments in cases where the county is acting on behalf of the state to provide services. And one example of this is around aid and assist contracts for mental health programs. This is a more recent issue where more services are being pushed out to the local level, but not necessarily with covering the local government's liabilities associated with that work. So we are working closely with AOC and a number of counties to make sure that we can get that state indemnification as we're providing all of those services that are becoming more of a that is becoming a more common issue for us.
Can we just talk about that issue for a minute? I know our attorney has weighed in on that. It seems to me, wasn't there legislation before the legislature last session on
Yes.
this? And what was the result of
It
that?
did not pass.
Okay, so I really hope AOC is putting this at the forefront.
Yes, and that's
their
exactly
agenda.
what we will be running once again, and I think putting greater emphasis on to see if they can get it through this time.
So we, as counties, cannot assume all the state liability for the programs that they want us to provide, number one. Secondly, the money they provide us to implement the programs rarely covers the cost of what they require. Those are two big fat issues. And you know what? Do we have to necessarily accept the state funding to implement some of these programs if we are not relieved of future liability? Now, that's a question I don't expect you to answer, but it's a question that I think I'm going to be asking and pressuring those, for instance, at our Clackamas County Caucus. They need to be aware of that we cannot assume everything on the backs of counties, because legislators have really high ideals and high ideas of what they want to see done. Because I used to be a legislator. I was one of those people, oh, this is a good project, had no idea how to implement it whatsoever. And so I do think our legislators need to be privy of that, and they need to understand that. And maybe that's a little bit of a conversation, Chris and Trent, that needs to come up. We have a virtual morning breakfast coming up. And let's write some talking points for me on that.
Yep, we will absolutely do that, and I think you're exactly right. And I would say it's not just the legislature. Some of this is resulting from ballot measures. But I think there's general acknowledgement that, some of these services are better placed at the local level. But at the same time, we need to have that indemnification to be able to do it successfully.
Well, the counties have always usually carried out, for instance, social programs. We do have a state Department of Human Services, but it's the counties where, That's where the boots meet the ground out here. And I do think our legislators understand that, but they need to understand these other couple pieces here.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And then lastly, our legislative principles on the next page of your packet are very similar to what they have been with slight modifications. And that is the summary of the state agenda. If there are no questions.
Do we have any, Sonia, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate this, and this is for the February short session.
Correct.
Couple things that have been bubbling up, and our principals capture them in a broad sense, but Representative Marsh is hoping to get through a proposal to provide turnkey for counties that did not participate in the first round, and it will be broader than just shelter, look at sheltering and transitional housing. And so just to put that in your radar too, we discussed it as a commission, and our staff is looking at what that would mean for Clackamas County, but that there's an interest there in us being part of that, and that will happen very fast because short session is very short. So I wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And then the other issue that is just now getting on the surface, which I think takes a statewide response, and I don't know if it will be addressed anywhere in the short session or if we need to put it on, just put it in for the future, but the issue of homelessness and meth addiction is a huge challenge and problem, and finding solutions for that. It's really taxing our judicial system, our behavioral health system, and the traditional ways of like permanent supportive housing when we think of people with challenges. It doesn't work effectively. So it's talking with down in Eugene, the challenges there. Well, it's a big issue. We've got to somehow figure out how we're going to tackle it, because the new meth is not the old meth, and it is really creating challenges.
That's interesting, very interesting.
Yeah.
That you mentioned that, and I am interested in that too, following up on whatever we can lay assistance to. Do you have any more questions?
Nope, I just wanted to issue spot that, and thank
Appreciate
you, you guys. You do such great work. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Commissioner Schrader.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Commissioner Fisher, because that's what I've been reading in the news, and not just anecdotally, but the fact that a lot of the houselessness does seem directly related to drug use. I have hesitated to say something because I'm glad you brought it up, because there has been some pushback that, in my mind, that maybe isn't the case, but yet it seems to be the case. And I think that any kind of we can do wraparound services, but unless the whole addiction, drug trafficking, how people are getting a hold of this is stopped. So I would say it's also a public safety issue,
Oh, absolutely.
not just, you said judicial, but it's also, it's also a public safety issue of how we kind of manage, access to that kind of stuff. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've been kind of hesitant about that.
Well,
So,
yeah, and you look at the increased homelessness, and so we opened up warming shelters. And who comes to the warming shelters?
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
the element that most of them, I visited at least one.
I think the Atlantic has a good article on addiction, and I'll try and find it and get it to people.
Okay, send it over, thank you. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, well, we've been talking about that for a long time. It still baffles me as we talk about it that we still rank at the bottom of the country with regards to behavioral mental health, funding, drug treatment, alcohol treatment centers in this region. It baffles me that I'm curious, Martha, you said there's a different opinion. I mean, who's saying it's not the case, for example, that we don't need that? Or that's not the way to do it?
It's not that they're saying that it's not the case, but when there's been pushback when people have gone out to visit these areas, and they'll say, oh, most of the people I've talked to were addicted, have these issues. that's where people, oh, no, that's not the case. I mean, we've had testimony saying, well, that's, you shouldn't be out there visiting and coming back and making this statement, because that isn't the case. And I've been hesitant because of that to mention it. And it was one of our meetings, I remember, that we had folks saying, criticizing the visits, criticizing all that kind of stuff, so.
Yeah,
But it is the case, I think it is. I think there's huge addiction problems out there.
Yeah.
And I do think we need a facility, so.
yeah, I really think that we need to make a case of this. I think this is the time, frankly,
Yeah.
to amplify it. It is, we've all said it. I've been saying it frequently. I've been saying it for a number of years, and that's, not that I thought of it. I'm listening to people that are in the professions that
Yep.
have made the case. So, I'm just here trying to, basically advocate on behalf of all that. We're hearing now from our emergency responders more than ever that a majority of their calls are just that. I mean, and we're being criticized. I mean, not say we, the county, but public, the public agencies are being criticized for sending a fire truck out to help someone out with a mental breakdown or whatever it may be. So we've got to, that costs money. And I don't think that the fire districts, for example, were designed and funded for that. They have advocated, even with our local sheriff's department, local police departments have advocated over and over, we need a place to take these folks when they're in trouble, whether it's 3 o'clock in the morning or it's Saturday, at 7 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is. There's not a lot of options. So why we're not ringing the bell louder and making this a larger case, I don't know. It baffles me. When we have every profession involves, the people on the street that are doing the work saying, we need it, we need it, we need it. We ought to be helping them. We ought to be advocating in a louder, stronger way than ever before. And I think it needs to be in caps, frankly. I don't know. How do we elevate that? I mean, how do we elevate that in this discussion here today for our agenda? I heard we're about to sign finally, months and months late, sign the IG with Metro for the supportive housing services. The LIP has nothing in there with regards to any kind of investment in a regional facility or even a county facility or facilities for, all three of those, behavioral health, drug, alcohol treatment, either of those. And now there's talk, I believe there's a 5% set aside. Well, maybe the 5% set aside should be, I guess the chairs are going to be sitting on that group to talk about it, but maybe there ought to be an early commitment to take that funding and start building some facilities and staffing them. But I just think we need to be a lot stronger about this. This is a crisis, and the crisis is getting worse. Let's face it, all the numbers is getting worse. Now, it's late already, but I can't sit here today and say that we shouldn't really
So I think that alarm
jump on this.
is sounding, I love it that Mary Rimbaugh is in the audience because she is hearing about it from all the statewide, being our leader for the behavioral health providers for the state level. I know that through AOC, we were discussing, this is a tri-county issue, but it's really a statewide issue. It's not just limited to the tri-county area. So what we did with the opioids, I think did we all participate in that? There was a summit that happened. It was at the old Merrillhurst. It brought together a interdisciplinary group to really address that, and that made huge impacts in how to deal with that crisis. This is different. This is really presenting huge challenges out there. So the alarm has sounded just issue spotted.
Yeah.
Let's move it through. And the things that have worked in the past don't necessarily work for this population. So I don't know that there is a cookie cutter answer. It's going to take some creative thinking, really bringing together what will be the solution.
And I would just offer that our principles do specifically say assisting vulnerable populations, including residents who are facing homelessness, substance abuse, and addiction. So we are covered here, and we will keep on top of this issue.
This is great discussion,
The legislature
Chris.
took action in a number of these areas this last session. I'm sure it will be back in front of them again this year.
Good, good.
Well, I mean, if I may, I'm just going to take one more stab at this. We've done that for 10 years, since I've been here, right?
Yeah.
We've been saying the same thing. It's a line, it's a line. I just think we need to be more aggressive about it. I don't know what the answer is. I'm looking to all of us here in the room. We need to be more aggressive. I'm not interested in putting the same line we've had in there for 10 years.
Well, Clackamas County won't solve this by ourselves. This
That's
is a
right.
region-wide, statewide issue. I want to thank you for bringing it up in this discussion, but we need to move ahead on what we're here, the agenda. So, Chris?
Yeah, so before we move to the federal agenda, I would ask
So
for your
you have two
consideration.
asks, is that right? The courthouse and I-205 improvements? Is that?
Yeah, I would just say generally approving the state agenda as proposed.
And Gary, what kind of action do we need on
I
that?
recommend a motion to approve.
So we're looking at the statewide agenda highlighted as the courthouse and I-205 improvements. We're continuing our advocacy on that as it is. Any questions from commissioners on the statewide agenda?
So moved?
Well, to the chair's question, I do have a
There's a motion on the table. I need a second or not.
second for sake of discussion.
Thank you.
So,
Commissioner Fisher has made the motion to approve the state agenda for the Oregon Legislature session coming up February. Paul has seconded the motion. Paul, go ahead.
yeah, and maybe this is more of a question for my colleagues, and my question is this, because I'm going to ask the question, we're going to be talking about it next week, I believe, on Tuesday, but I want some better definition of when it says federal funding to support the I-205 improvements project. How would you define that? Would that include tolling or not include tolling? Would that include congestion pricing or not include congestion pricing?
So I believe you've jumped ahead to the federal agenda.
Well, this is a state issue.
Thanks, Commissioner. It is in both agendas, so it's a fair question. And I think what your agendas give us is the flexibility to go pursue resources at the state and federal level, but you've also given us additional guidance with the outcomes and values on transportation funding in the region that guides how we also, I can think of that as an amendment to how we do this work, specifically on this project. So we take that direction from you on how to navigate those conversations around funding for those major projects, especially for I-205.
Yeah, but this board supported on May 10th, HB 3055.
That's correct.
And I will remind this board that in House Bill 2017, the prior legislature already approved tolling for the state. So it's not like we took a vote to approve tolling. We don't have the authority to do that. So I want to make that point very clear as well. Any further discussion on the motion on the table?
Yeah, the only other piece, and piggybacking what Commissioner Savas had said, I do think that where there is an opportunity, I think it's too quick for the short session, but defining for us locally, for Clackamas County, what we want to direct the state, the Transportation Commission to focus on as far as the sideboards of what tolling would be if implemented, we really need to be strong, because all we hear from them is, well, the legislature told us to, like Chair Smith has said, but we need to say, look, there needs to be look at geographic equity, we need to look at economic equity. It can't just be Clackamas County as the first and only, and it shouldn't be all lanes. I mean, we can present something to our Clackamas caucus to direct how this could play out, if indeed it's going to happen.
Commissioner Fisher, those efforts, I think, are already on the books. JPAC has done some good work with Paul. This board doesn't know it yet, but we'll be bringing a letter before this board from the mayors and the chair about tolling that we're going to send to the Oregon Transportation Commission. That's coming up. I'm not sure, probably next week. We'll take a look at that. And it's a very good written letter with all of our priorities and principles and issues in mind. It's nothing new, it's just repeating that, because the Oregon Transportation Commission will start to meet on that issue this month, I believe. And I believe it's the Oregon and correct me if I'm wrong, the Oregon Transportation Commission, a 5-member board, will set the parameters on how, when, and how much tolling is done. Is that correct?
Currently correct.
Yeah, as far as we know, unless something changes.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Paul, your card is up.
Yeah, so I just want to state that HB 2017 and HB 3055, there's no instruction that says that the state shall toll all the lanes.
That's
There is
true.
there's no language of that.
True.
Yeah.
So I just want to state that. And I want to also repeat the fact that we supported this project primarily because of the dangerous diversion that was taking place. And I'm having a lot of conversations regionally with a lot of folks, ODOT and others and everything else. And I think we need to hold the line on this project was about reducing the diversion, not maintaining the same level of diversion and building the project. That's not our goal. So I think we need to be very, very strong, whatever kind of communications they are, that the reason we support this project is to reduce the diversion from the pre-COVID level. Reduce it from that level. It is just, that is the reason we're behind this project. I don't know of another reason we are for this project.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion on the table. And Martha?
I just want to say MPAC is also working on that. I've been working with DTD services.
Can you speak into your microphone? Thank you.
It's not even on, because as you negotiated JPAC, I need to be on the same page, and MPAC, because evidently we finally are going to vote on something for a change. So, and my sense is, as I said, it's not that we're in opposition at this point as much as we need to have set parameters about what this means, because tolling all lanes is not going to work. I will tell you, though, what I hear from constituents is they're just totally, they're lit.
Oh, they're
over this.
sideways. Oh, my gosh, can you believe
They're
it?
so sideways and all kinds of other things. So I think that needs to be said to our regional partners, but I do understand that we're going to have to negotiate because that train is kind of left the station, so.
Okay,
Let's
thank you.
get Tracy and
Okay, folks, we're
Everett
running
together.
short on time. These discussions are great, but we've had them before many times. I'm going to try to keep us on track because we have another part of the agenda. We have a motion on the table to accept the state agenda. Shannon, please call the poll.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
I.
Chair Smith?
Aye, motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Next slide. We're now going to transition to our proposed 2022 federal agenda, and Trent will take it from here.
Thank you, Chris. Commissioners, so similar exercise as the state agenda. This federal agenda will direct PGA and Summit strategies on how to support the priorities of the county moving into 2022. And then, of course, at the end of the year, just like we did this morning, Summit will come back and talk to you about the results of that work. And so similarly, we have a primary county initiative at the federal level, where it's much more specific. It's I-205, it's a federal highway. And so we've been working on that. The infrastructure funds that have come from the feds this last year is a big step in that process, and it's going to provide a lot of grants that we think that we'll be working with ODOT and Summit to try to get ODOT to apply for a lot of those grants to help mitigate some of those tolling conversations that y'all were just talking about. That's our primary initiative at the federal level. We have a series of priorities, and as Chris said earlier, these priorities and these initiatives are basically Clackamas specific, or without Clackamas County, it would kind of get pretty broad. But some of these are a little bit more robust, as you'll see. So Willamette Falls Locks, obviously that's within the city limits of West Linn. That's been a priority since the board passed the resolution in 2014 to repair and reopen the locks, as well as management of federal forest lands. Clackamas County is such a cool place. We are right in the middle of the state's largest urban area. Also, 52% of our land is managed by the federal forest, and we have a giant mountain in the middle of it. So Clackamas County has a broad landscape, and that means we have a broad agenda on some of this stuff. But that includes federal management, wildfire prevention, and including some of the SRS conversations y'all were asking questions about earlier. So we were watching those closely. We want additional flexibility on the American Rescue Plan Act funds so that this board, can make additional decisions as needs arise. We know that there's going to be legislation produced by our delegation on Mount Hood related to recreation and access and protection. So we're looking for flexibility to work with that delegation on those priorities, as well as what y'all were just talking about, housing and human service programs, because our H3S department here receives a lot, if not most of their funding from state and federal resources. So it's really important that we are tied in with the work that's happening in DC and Salem as it relates to the success of that department. So those are our initiatives and priorities. For the sake of time, I was pretty brief. For our legislative principles, they're almost identical to the state to allow us the flexibility to be nimble, both in Salem and DC, to represent the needs of this county. And that's the federal agenda proposed.
Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you. I know we're short on time, but an issue that is bubbling up, don't know if my other commissioners have heard about this, but because there is the wildfire concerns and the federal forest land is, especially up on the mountain, is at risk of fire, and it's more difficult to prevent because of the restrictions. Businesses up on the mountain cannot get insurance because it's too costly, and there's no power to deal with the federal forest lands. I've talked to Congressman Schrader about this. I've talked to Congressman Blumenauer. They are aware of the issue, but the solution, don't know what the solution is. I'm just flagging that because it directly affects our businesses that are trying to do work, and it hurts our recovery, and it hurts us rebounding from this pandemic, and it's somehow we've got to figure it out.
Appreciate the way you frame that, of like what we're trying to recover from, the
Yep.
pandemic, the diversity of the needs. I would say that our principles give us the flexibility to continue pursuing those conversations and work with our delegations on potential solutions. Barring a solution, I think our principles are the way forward as it relates to our agenda today. But we can certainly work that and see where that goes from here.
Yep.
Now that you flagged it, thank you.
And because it is such a big recreation area, people go up to the mountain, they want to be able to go to a restaurant. They want to be able to purchase items they need while they're on vacation. Government Camp has a lot of second homes for recreation and vacation. I'm wondering if the insurance on those second homes are seeing the same impacts as you mentioned about insurance on businesses. So that's something for consideration. Move forward on that too. I mean, I don't know, these are questions you bring up. So are there any more comments on the presentation that Trent has done on our federal agenda?
Yep.
I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we support the federal agenda as presented.
Second.
Commissioner Fisher has made a motion to support the federal agenda and state agenda as presented from our staff, and Commissioner Savas has seconded that motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Shannon, please call the poll.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader? Aye. Chair Smith?
Aye. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much. Go forth and conquer.
Thank you very much. We have one more topic, and I know we're borrowing time from Nancy's presentation. Thank you for your patience.
What's the
But-
topic?
What's the topic?
Direction, a head nod, not approval, a head nod on moving forward with earmark requests that the county has been vetting.
I thought we just did that.
So we have a state agenda, we have a federal agenda, but within our federal work, the county is prepared to go forward and apply for congressionally directed spending projects. So we did this in 2021, and Summit Strategies did a preview on how we did that and what we pursued, and sort of the results of that work. That's going to be a repeating process every year. And so
Okay, so commissioners, are there any objections to the earmarks that were, the federal earmarks that were presented earlier today?
The list I saw was about eight or nine or so.
It's up on the,
Yeah.
it's on the
Yeah,
screen.
yeah, okay, there, yeah. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Yep, I'm good with that.
Okay.
And just remember, we'll be back
We
with a
see no
final list.
objections to that. Trent, thank you very much. I think you have your direction that you need.
Thanks.
You betcha. Up next, Gary.
Thank you. Next final policy session is the American Rescue Plan Act funds, ARPA recommendations. Nancy Bush and I will present. Nancy's County Operating Officer. First, I want to thank Nancy and our internal committee, our internal ARPA committee. They did a fantastic job. They did a full detail analysis of every single ARPA request, the rationale behind it, the background, the attachments. You have a huge, several pages in your packet, which is what you asked for, Commissioner. So thank you, Nancy, and the team in the room. Bravo, fantastic work. I'm sorry, Nancy, I'm sorry if I'm overlapping here. You have approximately $9 million left to spend in this current round of ARPA that we've received. You can make decisions today. You can make no decisions today. We simply want to report back to you with a check-in to see what, if any, decisions you'd like to make, and staff does have some recommendations on how you could spend those dollars. That's my opening. Nancy, please go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning, Commissioners, and thank you, Gary. So I am Nancy Bush. I'm the County Operations Officer, and what I'd like to do today, with the Chair's permission, is go over what has been approved, where we are in that process, what the committee would like to see, consideration for approval today, and then, Chair, I'll let you decide on how we want to deal with the rest of the
Okay,
list.
so we have let's just go through the already approved list,
Okay?
and let's, Commissioners, is it necessary to repeat the already approved list of ARPA funding? Or do you want Nancy to belabor that once again? It's pages, just a minute, Paul, it's pages 1 of 2 and 2 of 2.
Yeah.
And that spending to date is $28,684,455. That has already been approved by this board. Paul?
Yeah, I guess one question I need to I have a question I need to better understand what's in the packet. Nancy, I'm looking at the work session here, and it says this first installment remaining 8 million roughly, the second installment remaining 22. So back to the chair's question, we must have obligated 18 million somewhere of the next installment. I don't remember doing that.
Are you talking about, that? This is if we approve what we're asking to be approved today.
So
All of this, you mean? I mean, say if we approved everything on this list, we would have that much remaining?
The 30 million, yes. No, not everything on the list, only what the committee is saying, here's what we would like to have considered seriously today because of where we are in the pandemic and some things that we need. The other stuff is, we will have discussion about. I mean,
Okay.
you'll have discussion about that too,
So Nancy,
yes.
there's a lot of things on this list.
There's a lot of numbers on a lot of
Okay,
things.
then we have 9 million remaining. The ask is much more than 9 million. Are you asking for us to allocate from the next allocation in May also?
So if you will look at the second page of the memo.
Yeah, I'm looking.
Okay, so first of all, I do have a correction in math there, my error, I apologize. So that first installment remaining, so the consideration for the first installment that we're asking from the committee is asking for these projects today that are listed there is $1,421,279. There are several projects not in that you, the commissioners, will be considering. The second installment consideration that we're asking for, the committee is saying we would like to have this consideration, is $9,164,324.
Okay,
Okay.
Nancy, we're going to pause right here for
Okay.
a moment. Gary, explain the numbers.
Yes,
Because we
so-
only have 9 million left, but Nancy, you're asking
That's in the
for
first installment.
10.1, 10.5.
Right. So there is $9.6 million left in the first installment of ARPA dollars the county has received. We received $40.6 million of that. There is $9.6 million left. So first of all, that's the base you're working off of. That's what you have remaining to spend right now. And after May 2022, we'll receive, and we don't know when, but some point after May 2022, we'll receive the second installment. But let's focus on what you have in the bank right now, which is $9.6 million. Back to the staff report, page 2. The staff committee is recommending several costs to keep us internally able to maintain the work we're doing on COVID response.
Yes.
And it's significant, and it adds up to $1.4 million right now, this current round. So
Yes.
that's something we're asking you to consider, to spend $1.4 million just on internal costs to maintain our COVID response. So of the $9.6 million, we'd subtract $1.4 million, should you approve it,
I see.
which leaves $8.2 million left in the current round of spending to spend.
Okay, now, that makes more sense. However, it's not written in that regard.
I apologize.
That's okay.
I tried to make it sound that way, and
Yeah.
my apologies.
I can't find 9.6 million anywhere.
Yeah, I don't either, Paul, but
It's
the
on page 4
first attachment
It's
after the staff report.
Yeah.
at the bottom. Yeah, because there is so many numbers, when any one of us is talking about anything, if we could direct us to which page, I think that will help us all pay attention better. Or just know what we're talking about.
Yeah, because I was on the second page of the memo.
I was too.
It's a
Because that's where
challenge.
you told me to
Well,
look.
that's because, that's where I was
Okay.
quoting what we were asking for as a group.
And my computer has frozen. I'm so happy
I've had
about
computer
that.
problems all day today.
Yeah, okay, so this is how I recommend, Nancy, we do this.
Okay.
Staff has brought forward 1.4 million of internal costs. What are those?
Okay.
And where are they?
Okay, so if you go to your spreadsheets, and
starting on page 1 of 8.
So, if you go to the spreadsheet, that is attachment 3 at the bottom, and it has public health starting at the top, public health EOC at the very top.
Hang on a minute.
So it's attachment 3,
Yes.
policy session packet page number 7, because all these pages are numerically numbered. Policy session packet page 7. It also says page 1 of 8. There's 3 different signposts here for you.
Is it 7 of 8?
It's page 1 of 8, although it's policy session page 7, so it is. Yep, correct, you're on the right page.
Okay, I get it. Staff, so just so you know, there's page numbers on the left side, there's page numbers on the right side.
Yes. Okay.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. So the first line there is for public health EOC. So right now, we have $3 million that is for public health, behavioral health, and the EOC. I have broken them down here for more transparency and for the board to understand more of what we're looking at and asking for. That first line is public health EOC. It's COVID ongoing response. The requested amount is almost 3.6 million. This is to continue with our COVID recovery. So this, of course, the Public Health Division is working on COVID recovery. There's a lot of things still obviously going on. We continue to have vaccine clinics. We continue to have to do contact tracing. All of those things are still continuing. So
I'm going to interject something right here.
Okay.
The governor has said she wants us to beef up the vaccine clinics for the booster. Okay, that funding comes through FEMA. And what happens is, and I asked Philip about this yesterday because I was concerned about more vaccination clinics. How do we pay for it? He says it's basically a blank check from FEMA. So why would we use these funds to continue on our vaccination clinics?
So and I think there's some crossover here of things that we didn't know we were getting before. So that's new information.
Okay,
After
so
I
I am
believe this was
concerned
done.
about allocating almost $6 million to public health when there's another pot of money to do this.
And whenever you look though, for the first installment for public health, we're only asking, that almost 6 million would come out of the second installment.
Okay, but that's dangerous. That's a little bit dangerous because, first of all, we don't know the future. And if we are in another round of COVID, I believe, and the governor would advocate for additional funding for the counties, or we wouldn't be able to do the programs that they mandate. So I'm very concerned about committing future funding, number one, that we don't have yet, and number two, that we don't know what's going to happen yet. It's a little bit different. For instance, IT had a request for broadband. That was a hard cost, okay? What you're asking for public health is not necessarily a hard cost. I'm having some heartburn over that, and maybe commissioners can help me, Gary.
Yes, if I can add to that. So Nancy, I'm going to suggest that we not discuss any of the second installments. Let's focus entirely on the first installment, this current round of funding. Because already we're over what we said. We're asking for 1.4 million, but this is for 3.5. So let's just focus entirely on what we're asking for right now, this round, please.
So if you go down to the Human Services, EOC, we're looking at 261,921 there. That is to help with the Human Resources Department and risk management. We have a lot of things that are coming in, obviously, with things that we have to comply with. There is a lot of looking at buildings, all the safety issues around COVID. And we have a staff member right now that is on some of Philip's funding that we want to move over because he's running it, that funding runs out later, like I think in May, and we need to move an individual over to risk management to take over those duties.
Paul, you have a card up.
Yeah, so I wanted to build on what you asked for and kind of address really back to Nancy, and that is that what would be helpful here on this spreadsheet, Gary, you pointed out basically, but there's not a column here. There could be a column that says first installment, second installment. I agree with the chair completely that I just have a concern that I think some of these things should be funded by the state or will be funded by the state. And so we shouldn't be dedicating the Arpa dollars to something that I really think is either a fed or state, or likely to be a fed or state funded. So
Okay.
a little bit different angle I'm coming here from is that when do we really need to do this?
Okay.
I mean, what is really urgent that requires it today? Because I'm actually a little bit lost. I studied the packet here, and I got this handout
Okay.
in greater detail. And we're covering there's so much ground here to cover today, and different departments and so forth, and not enough time.
So if you look at policy session packet, page 2, and this is of the policy worksheet, it does say there, which you're right, it's not on this page, that's correct. So that's what I'm looking at to see what we're asking for from the first installment. Okay.
Yeah, but getting back to what is really urgent today?
Well, that is urgent.
Okay.
Because we will run out of money for that position in May.
In May.
So if I may, nothing is urgent today. You should make decisions by the end of this month on some of the things Nancy just mentioned. I have a proposal. So first, staff did a great job giving you all the information you requested, and it is an avalanche, isn't it? It's a lot of information. So I have a proposal. What if in the 30 minutes left, Nancy and I just walk through what all the requests are? You could think about it. We can come back next week at issues, or schedule a further policy session. We can add some of the, like you're right, we could add some columns by what's first installment, what's second installment, answer any kind of questions you may have, or hear your questions, then come back to you next week at a decision point. How about that?
Yeah,
Okay.
and also it'd be nice if maybe if you'd color code something or shade it, if it's urgent, maybe shade it red or something like that, so it's more
Okay.
clear.
Okay.
So I
Yeah,
thought
Martha.
the gray areas are the ones that you're asking for now, right?
No, with the gray areas are just it's easier to
Separate.
read whenever
Okay,
you,
all right, so there's no color coding.
no, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I will go through what we're asking from the first installment, since that's where I started. So that is one, the human resources piece is something that we will come back in the next week or so to ask. The next one is administration costs related to the ARPA funding. We are asking for $500,000 in the first installment, but $3 million total. I did take a look at other counties and what they are asking for administrative costs, and most of them are around 10%, and ours is below that, at between 5 and 6%. We need that for some financial support, as well as we're looking at some software that would help our nonprofits, as well as some of the businesses and anyone that does receive the funding, because there are certain reporting requirements that are required. And there's some really nice softwares out there that would help those individuals. It would help with the training. So that is what we're looking for there in our administrative costs.
And Nancy, where on all these spreadsheets? I'm just going to take notes, and I'm just wondering where I would write a note on that item. What page?
So on the spreadsheet,
Yep.
that would be on attachment 3, page 2 of 8, that's way over on the right. And it says multiple department staffing and needed software.
Okay.
Okay, it says $3 million.
Yes, total.
And you want how much?
We want $500,000 from the first installment.
Okay. That's confusing. You need to say, total cost is $3 million. Today, we're asking for $500,000. Now, this is the danger. If we give $500,000 to this, and you come back, oh, we need another $2.5 million because we can't finish it, I will not allocate spending today or next week for monies that we do not have yet.
I understand.
Okay, so I need an answer to that question. Does that make sense, Gary?
Yes?
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
I understand that.
So will $500,000 buy us the necessary software
It would buy us some software and some staffing.
and some staffing? For how long?
We're hoping through the end of June, that is,
The end of who?
the end of June,
Okay, end of
at
June.
least the end of June. It could go beyond that, but at least the end of June.
But now this is for the administration and the accounting for receiving the ARPA funds is a big deal.
It is.
We have to be in compliance.
Yes.
And that takes time, it takes staff time, it takes accounting, it takes software. I understand that. Yes, we need to pay for that service out of some of this money. I'm shocked that it's going to be $3 million.
Again, this is something that all of the counties have taken a look at, and it's an estimate. I mean, we're only estimating right now because we're just learning some of the things that we might be needing.
Okay,
Ours is much lower than Multnomah County and Washington County are around 10%.
around 10%.
Ours is a lot lower.
So I'm wondering if we move forward, Commissioners, if we shouldn't consider just a 10% set aside off the top for administration. So that is something to put in your mind, Bill. We don't have to decide that today. We can review that next week, but let's make a
Okay.
note, 10% cost to implement the free money.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Smith, I have a
Yes, go
question.
ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
That's all right. So question, when this board approved 13 million for lost revenue, and it was distributed to everyone, a spreadsheet that staff prepared, which looked at what was the lost revenue, how did that impact operations, and how will replacing the money aid in recovery? And in working with my staff, I understand that this was written in a way that it helps and how the county will recover, not necessarily the people out there that are struggling with the impacts of COVID. So my question through all of this is, if this money, this 13 million that we put back into the county for these different areas due to lost revenue, could we have a question? Can any of those funds be dedicated to any of these administrative costs? I don't know where these dollars will be going from the lost revenue, if they go into the general fund.
And I think that part of that is actually in the spreadsheet that you got. So some of them, for example, tourism is putting it back into tourism. And it ended up being almost 8 million whenever we went back and made sure that everything was eligible. But so tourism is going to go back into tourism, which does also help our communities. So I guess the answer is that when it goes back into that program is using it for what they need to help recover from COVID. Environmental health, for example, is using it to help our businesses so they don't have to pay higher environmental fees. So that is helping our businesses, for example. So I don't know, Gary, if you have more, but the program that it went back into, it is doing that recovery for what they were needing, that they were missing during COVID, for those gaps.
I agree, and I would just add these costs we're requesting for administrative support. I mean, this is all new. Implementing this
Yes.
$80 million, we, the county, is responsible for how we spend the money. Whoever we give it to, they're not responsible, we're responsible. So
Right.
there's some administrative costs, so we don't break the law, that we meet the standards and the requirements. And this is beyond the normal work of what county employees do. So
Yes.
that's why we're requesting this, is that we don't add to the burden of staff who are just doing their very best to maintain the services we already provide. This is
Yeah.
additional
Yeah,
requirement.
it
And we
is.
want to make sure that our audits are clean, and
Oh, sure.
we need some staff and some software to help us do that.
Okay. Commissioner Savis.
Yeah, I think, Commissioner Fisher, that as I recall, that a lot of that is defined as to replace lost revenue, right? Which keeps a department or a division or a district whole, right? So I assume that a lot of that went. So whatever that department or district did is really services to the public in one form or fashion. But I do agree, I think, with the point you're trying to make, is that going forward, let's make sure that we're not just keeping ourselves whole, but we're also putting an eye on the outside community where the most urgent needs are. So philosophically, I agree with that. But I do want to go back just to one thing that's stuck in my mind for the spreadsheet clarification that Kimberly sent out, again, responding to your question, Commissioner Fisher, and that is that NCPRD, I think, got the biggest chunk. It was like almost 3.3, right? I honestly, was that more than 1 year of revenue? Because I had no idea that the district generated outside revenue of that size. And we'll find out more today. I've had some financial requests, but I didn't think it was anywhere near that high. So knowing that there's $8 million worth of, I'll just tell you why, just some rough math, $8 million of annual tax revenue on the 54 cents per thousand, plus 3.3 is $11 million. That's not the average amount, annual budget. So it doesn't pencil, So I just want to as an example, I'm not here to cite that one in particular, but I would like to know what really is truly lost revenue and
Thank you.
and parse that out.
Yeah.
And then what is COVID response oriented that could be augmented back to Trudy's point with state funding that rightfully show we shouldn't be spending these scarce dollars, these one-time dollars on that. So I want to make sure it's clear, because if we can get a reimbursement for COVID-related things, state or fed, let's maximize that.
Yeah, and no, and we do, and we are. For example, Philip Mason Joyner and their response, they are spending down their federal funding or their state funding before they even touch ARPA. That's also true of disaster management. That's also been true of behavioral health, because they had FEMA dollars that just ended. So they have to start spending these dollars now. The part of the complexities is when we see like this variant and all of a sudden we get this influx of money that we didn't know we were going to get, but we will spend that first. And so rest assured, we're not spending this for those things until, we will not spend ARPA until we know that those are spent. But we are getting influx of money that we didn't know we were going to get 2 months ago. I hope that helps, because we are making sure we spend that money first.
Yeah, and I know I trust that you understand that in a great degree, better than we do, right? It's hard for me to visualize what you probably recognize.
Yeah.
It's hard.
There's nothing easy about this stuff, these
No, it's not.
dollars.
Yeah, okay, so that's clear as mud. Let's proceed.
Okay. All right, thank you. So the next item is, and I may have Andrew Nars come up and talk about this just a little bit. We're talking about the federal mandate and what may be happening at the federal level and in the courts. We haven't asked that this could be immediate, depending on what happens. We have to pay for testing. If that all passes and it goes through, and then Oregon OSHA comes down, we have to pay for all that testing. So we have an estimate of what that testing would be for our county employees. We did an estimate, because we don't know how many are not vaccinated, that it would be around 600 a week, which would be for a year around $1.3 million, which we expect to go up because testing supplies as well as staff to do it is also increasing. But I wanted Andrew just to give you an update on where we are on that particular piece.
Okay, and where on the spreadsheet is that?
That is it says Human Resources Public Health Testing for Federal Mandate. It's right above the multiple department staffing that we just talked about.
That's
Thank you.
Top to page 2 attachment.
2 of 8.
Thank you.
It's page 2 of 8, and it's the very first line. You got it? All right. Andrew.
Good morning. Yeah, briefly, I can just tell you that on Friday, the Supreme Court is going to hear oral argument on OSHA's vaccination or test mandate. Depending on what they decide, they may reinstitute the stay on the mandate, and it will not be effective on us. And Oregon OSHA will not issue a rule that will be binding on us. But if they decide to uphold the rule and allow it to go forward, then the county will be obligated to test weekly all unvaccinated staff under OSHA's mandate. That's where those costs are coming from, the weekly tests that we have to administer or ensure are being done by an outside contractor. And those are not costs that we can pass on to employees at this point. They're considered job-related medical exams, which we need to pay for.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So
What kind of test is it?
it is, I think it's the rapid.
We could do rapid. Any of the approved tests would be available to
Or
us.
PCR. Yeah.
Right.
But PCR will take longer to get back, obviously. It is. It just takes, right now, at least 3 days to get back.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
with all the talk at the federal level of testing becoming more available and testing being funded by the federal government, more tests becoming available, is that on the table, that they will be paying for these tests
Not
for
for employment.
mandated employers?
Not for employment. This is I'm sorry, I'm speaking
Not
from
that I've
county
heard
council.
of. Again, they don't, in the state, we're required to pay for these types of exams of employees. And so I haven't heard anything that the federal government would be supplying funding or supplying tests or anything like that. I do know that when they issued the rule, OSHA assessed that there were enough tests available nationwide to satisfy this requirement. And I don't know if they've changed that opinion based on the recent
Not enough
increase in
tests,
testing
yeah.
demand.
Yeah, we don't necessarily agree with that, but,
Of course not.
so this is complex, and if they were to pass it, this is something that we would need to have pretty
Well,
quickly.
I believe I was watching a national news thing about the testing, and it was very clear that if a public agency could distribute the tests, that the tests were free, but if you were to go to a private store and buy them, that you had to pay for them, and that was for any purpose, people going to work or people getting on an airplane, whatever the purpose of that person desiring the test. So it seems to me, it being a federal mandate, and it being, whether it's employment or getting on an airplane, if you're a public employee, why would the government have to pay for that when the rest of the industry or the country is getting that for free? Now, I think that was a federal, I think that was a national news thing, or it could have been a state one. I don't recall. It was yesterday, actually, I watched it. So the question is, if it's a mandate, it should be a funded mandate.
That's right. Oh, absolutely. But you know what, Paul, as we know in government, there's a lot of unfunded mandates coming down.
But we have our federal lobbyist here in the audience, so I'm sure that Hal can fix that for us.
I can just offer that federal OSHA didn't mandate employers pay for the test. Again, this is an issue of state law. The Oregon Health Authority and the Bureau of Labor and Industries has interpreted these COVID tests to be job-related medical exams, and under state law, we're required to pay for those.
And in addition to that, it's not just for the testing too. We have to, because these are medical records, we have to have a system that we don't have yet to build a system that will keep the medical records.
Okay, now wait a minute. I thought medical information was protected and private.
It is, and that's why we have to have a system to do this.
Well, no. I argue the opposite. Nobody needs to know if I take a test what the results are.
But we have to see the result before the employee can come to work.
Okay, but is there a lock on it? I can just hear our union presidents right now. We have a meeting this week, don't we?
No, it's the end of the
Next
month.
week?
Right.
Yeah, holy cow. I think this is a workforce issue.
It is.
Andrew, give us a 2-minute update. It's the law, right? An employer has the right to ask for medical information if it's due to your work or something, work requirements, right?
Correct. Under the ADA, it would be considered a job-related medical inquiry that we have to comply with. We can do the rapid test, but they actually have to be observed by the employer, the testing and the result. Alternatively, we could send them to a contractor or something like that and have that information transmitted to us. But yes, Gary's right. It's something that we need to know to comply with the law, and therefore we have a right to the information.
Sonia?
Well, I'm just wondering, so I was on the phone with Dr. Sharon Esquire Myron this morning about just Omicron and the whole thing, and everybody's going to get it. We're all going to get Omicron. It's just the way it's going to go. And so is there any, and you can't get a test at all. I mean, we were in Hawaii. My husband had the sniffles. He thought, oh my gosh, we're going to fly. I'm going to have to get a test. We still don't have the results of his test, which was like 5 days ago.
Wow.
I mean, there's a serious problem in this country about tests, and because everything has changed since that mandate went into effect, is there any talk of the president changing this?
I can tell you that given the rather convoluted course this mandate has taken through the circuit courts with the stay being in effect, OSHA has delayed enforcement, I believe, until February 10th. Now, we're not necessarily bound by federal OSHA's decision. We're obligated to follow the Oregon OSHA rule. The latest that would be in effect would be February 23rd for us, but I have seen some leeway from federal OSHA, and perhaps the state would follow suit to delay strict compliance with the rule depending on testing availability. So that is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we need to move on. Why are we here right now? Not to talk about the tests and what blah, blah, blah. Andrew, I thank you for the information. However, we have a lot of decisions to make, and we haven't even scratched the surface of this list. So I'm going to recommend.
Yes.
You can continue with as much as you can today, but we have 10 minutes left in this session. Unless we want to stay, I have a 1 o'clock appointment. If you want to stay for as long as it takes, or we end this, you come back with the information that we have requested and break it down so we can more easily make decisions on spending. And we can do it that way. Martha, you have a question? Please.
Well, I agree with your suggestion. But I'm also going to ask, maybe what we should do is do 2-2-1s and just sit. I don't know, Gary.
Martha, he's waving at you to turn on your microphone.
I know, I don't turn it on because I sniff
That's okay.
I was able to get 2 rapid tests in Boston, however. I've been
Okay.
tested twice. They're all negative, but I don't know if it detects Omicron. That's the issue you have, but.
Well, it is
Okay.
cold season for crying out
Yeah, it
loud.
is.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
everybody
but-
that has the sniffles are in panic,
I
running to try to
panic.
find a
This
test. Oh,
couldn't
do I
have
have COVID or not?
So-
I know, that's what we're told to do.
I know.
And so, Gary, you're
I'm
shaking your
sorry, I
head.
don't recommend 221s.
Please,
This is a public decision for you to make.
Okay.
Staff's going to present the information in a different way.
Okay.
That's more easily understandable. Certainly, if you have questions reading through this, you can let me or Nancy know offline.
Oh, okay, that's
And I'm
kind
gonna
of what.
We'll work offline to come back to you. I'm probably going to suggest 2 hours and just nail through it.
Yeah.
We'll talk about coming back to you and have at a decision point.
Yeah, we're gonna,
Yeah.
let's try to get this scheduled. Now, Nancy, I want you to finish out.
Yeah.
Without commissioners, we're done commenting.
Yes.
I need Nancy
So
to finish.
actually, what you requested, those are the things that are the most urgent things that we'll come back and say, hey, these are the things we'd really like to have a decision on by the end of the month. And then the other things we will put in the format and have that discussion. So that ended that part of the conversation. So,
Okay, so, I think you heard pretty good from the commissioners.
I think so,
On what
yes.
they need to understand. If not,
Yes.
just ask
And
us.
apologies, when you're in it, yeah. So apologies
Yeah, no worries.
because it is complex, and when
Well,
you're
it
in
is,
it.
and I think, we're striving to understand what the rules, regulations, and law is, number one.
Sure,
We want to be able to spread this money out as evenly as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's got their hand in the pot wanting something.
yeah.
My objection to all these asks is it really necessary? And I'm going to really be zeroing down on that, especially with our public health.
And-
Now, I love public health, don't get me wrong, people, but if there's another way to fund what these asks for, I think we really need to figure that out.
And I think I'll be able to get back with Philip too, knowing
Yeah.
that we have new funding coming in that we didn't know about when this packet was put together. We can have that information here as well.
Okay, Gary, Nancy, what do you want to do now? Oh, Sonia?
Oh, yes.
When we move forward, the piece that is really important to me is to understand how we are utilizing the ARPA dollars for recovery. Like broadband, easy peasy. We
Right.
know, it was clear as day, broadband affected people being able to work from home, children being able to access internet.
So-
It's a no-brainer how that relates to our recovery. These are one-time dollars. I agree with Chair Smith. I don't want to see just them going into the black hole and not supporting our recovery.
So, and one of the things that were really important to this committee, and I should have said this earlier, is that the equity and the inclusion and, how, because that is, ARPA is very clear that those are some things that we really need to be looking at, which is on our spreadsheet. That doesn't mean that everything, there's also things in there, for example, because we have requests about space that is tight and it needs to be redone here at the county. Those things are still eligible. So I will make sure that that information is in that particular column about equity and inclusion and how that helps with that recovery for our most vulnerable populations. I think that's what you're looking for.
Well, and it's not so much that, it's just recovery. It's like the pandemic caused this, and how are we going to recover from the effects of the pandemic? Like managing a current testing for Omicron and all of that, is that helping us with our recovery? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just think these are questions we need to be asking, is
Yeah.
how does this aid us in recovering from the effects, the
And-
impacts of the pandemic?
Okay, yeah, and I'll talk to you a little bit offline. I think there's a recovery issue, but there's also we also are required to not only recover from, but we also have to respond to. And both of those things are in our guidance.
Response of going forward.
Yes, like responding to COVID issues,
Okay.
testing, for example.
I think
Okay.
when you talk about response for the future, it totally changes the dynamic. It changes my way of thinking.
Yeah, it totally changes my way of thinking. So that's good to know. When I hear the word American Recovery Plan, I think of recovering
Yeah.
from the pandemic.
And I don't know if Trent is still here, but Trent and I in particular have really dove into this. Yes, that's the title, but that's not just what's in the guidance. And we have said in here, it's like, this is where the guidance covers this particular project, and then there's pages where it says we're either still having to look at it or it doesn't qualify.
So, and it goes to Commissioner Savis's point he made in an earlier presentation. The running the printing press in Washington DC. Basically, that's how we get this money. That's how they're going to fund the infrastructure package or the build back or the earmarks, or I don't know what you want to call it. And that's why I believe Senator Manchin has done what he's done. He says, we're going to revisit the Trump tax breaks to try to backfill because you can't keep running the printing press. It's going to run out. We've already seen what it's done to inflation. We can't afford to build the projects we thought we were going to build for, and on and on and on and on. So it's very complicated. We will get through it. We will hopefully make some decisions next week when we're able to decipher the information in a little more compact areas. That's where my comfort level is. So Gary, with that in mind.
We'll come back to you, and actually, I want to talk to you offline, Chair. I'm not sure if next week is soon enough, but definitely by the end of this month.
Oh, okay, good. That's fine.
We'll definitely come back to you, Commissioners, and I'm going to propose a 2-hour session.
Thank you,
And we'll plow
Gary.
through it.
Thank you.
Why don't we just do a half day, Gary?
It might take maybe.
I'm serious.
Well,
I hate to put you through
it could be a 3-hour. Thank you.
Could be a
I see there's a
3-hour.
lot of staff in the room. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your needs, or maybe you just came to listen to us. I kind of doubt that, but I'm sorry you had to be subject to this.
Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned today, and thank you.